All right, what's up, everyone? Welcome back for another edition of Saturday Standouts. With me, as always, is my co-host Sam Daring. I had the miss last week. I had a lot going on. Was it last week or 2 weeks ago? I can't keep track of my days anymore. But Sam held it down. I think I was back last week, actually. So sorry for apologizing, guys.
It was I think it was 2 weeks ago you were gone.
Yeah, it was 2 weeks ago. My
Yeah.
bad. I'm getting my days mixed up here. So yeah, we had an awesome mock draft last week where we went over about 10 or so. 10, 15 or so names that we are kind of looking forward to being drafted in the first round of this upcoming NFL draft in late April. But before we go ahead and get into our sponsors and everything, Sam, how are you doing? I know we're twinning over here.
I'm doing well, man. I know you said your merch just came in today. Caleb and I are both repping Saturday Standouts tonight. Go get your merch and Teespring. I think the ticker, it should be on the ticker. We'll read those off in a bit here, but I'm doing well. I know my last semester of college started this week, so it should be interesting.
Well, that's exciting news, man. You're almost at the end of the line there. So
Yes,
yeah.
sir.
Yeah, that's exciting, dude. Until you get to the real world and you got to start figuring everything out and you got to pay the bills. But yeah, I had some interesting stuff happen to me today. There's a couple tornadoes here in Tallahassee, Florida this afternoon, and that was fun to deal with because one of them landed about a minute or two from my house, and I was just hoping that, not only was my house still here, but that the Wi-Fi was still going to be working, so we were able to have this show, and my power was on when I got home, and I was just, thank you, Lord. But everybody seemed to be safe. One of them landed at the airport, too, near here, so flipped over a couple of planes, so it was an interesting afternoon for myself, but enough about us. We'll go ahead and jump into our sponsors that we have, and I'll go ahead and screen share these with everybody. And the first one we got for you guys is Teespring, our unwrapped store on teespring.com/stores/unwrapped. You head over there and you'll get to look at all of your unwrapped merchandise, whether that's a cell phone case, a sticker. You've got a Friends inspired, outlook or style here. You've got your King outfits there. You got your drip unwrapped. You got your Hollywood designs as well. Unwrapped sports shows right there, the hard count. Another new one here. I'm not sure what that is. Have a nice day unwrapped. You got Gen Z. You got Fights Unwrapped. You got Fourth Man Pod, People's XFL Show. Ladies first, of course, the merchandise that you are seeing us wear right now. Your Saturday Standouts apparel right there. Get your Saturday Standouts crew neck, sweatshirt, and your die cut sticker if you're a fan of the show. And then also my show after this down here, I'm going to go ahead and give me a little shout out here for keeping it blunt, which we just dropped our merchandise last night. So go ahead and go grab your stuff over at teespring.com, again, /stores/unwrapped, and you can find all of your unwrapped merchandise there. Our next sponsor that we have for you guys is RX Hemp. It's an all-natural pain relief cream that is CBD infused. Bringing it up right now for you guys to be able to check it out. It's awesome. It's THC free, so it's just the CBD aspect from the marijuana leaf. It's great stuff. All natural pain relief cream. Use it on your achy joints that you have, any nerve, thing in your back or anything that bothers you. It's a warm and cold therapy that they got going on there. Awesome stuff. If you check out with them and use code RXHemp-USN, you will receive 10% off every single one of your purchases, guys. So that's USN it's RXHemp-USN for 10% off every single one of your purchase. Awesome stuff. I use it almost nightly on my back because I have a bad back standing all day. So you guys hear me say that every week. So if at this point you don't know that Caleb's got a bad back, now you do. But moving on from RX Hemp, we'll go into our last sponsor here, and that is MyBookie, which is an online betting site, gambling site. And if you use code USN100 on mybookie.ag, you will receive double your first deposit with a minimum deposit of $45. It's got everything you can ask for, from game lines to player props for games and everything like that you're also able to parlay. They do specials that you're seeing up here almost weekly. So you guys go check out mybookie.ag, sign up using code USN100 for double your first deposit with a minimum deposit of $45 and start using that money. They've also got an online casino, guys. That's pretty awesome. It's done nothing but, help me and get my money up on that website as well. So go check it out. But without further ado, Sam, I'll let you go ahead and jump into it. And what are we looking at this week?
I think one of the, the main things we were talking about before we went on there is, guys that didn't play all season. I mean, that list is a pretty pretty lengthy list. And I mean, one of those guys obviously is Trey Lance, probably leads that list of those players that didn't play. He played one game back in October, along with his teammate, who we'll get to in a second, is Dylan Raduns, a guy that has looked very promising, pretty impressive. Is off to a strong start in drills with the Senior Bowl. Before the Senior Bowl game itself actually kicks off on Saturday. But I'm anxious to see some of these guys that haven't played. This list just goes on and on. And Trey Lance, Dylan Raduns, Jamie Newman. Unless I'm blind, I didn't see Kenneth Gainwell on either of these rosters. I'm anxious to see Kenneth Gainwell. I mean, he'll be one of those guys now that we'll be keeping an eye on. For the draft, I see a lot of Tariq Cohen in him. He's a bit undersized, but I think he's got a very, very bright future in the NFL. But yeah, I mean, Caleb, I think one of the main things we were talking about is guys that haven't played all season, and there's numerous guys that I missed. But yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely noteworthy. And if you guys haven't caught on already, we are, breaking down a little bit of the Reese Senior Bowl coming up this Saturday. So you guys tune in to that the weekend right before the Super Bowl. So it'll be interesting. And one of the things that we were harping on, which, connects to what you were saying about a lot of these guys not necessarily playing this past season, whether that be their team opting out or them choosing to opt out themselves, is that this Senior Bowl is probably more important than any Senior Bowl in the past.
Yeah, and I mean, I've been listening to podcasts like draft podcasts, and Todd McShay himself has all these like Daniel Jeremiah's, the Mel Kiper Juniors, the Todd McShays. Like even he was saying like this has been the toughest season for experts like them to really grade these guys because they're not playing a full season. They're playing with no fans. They're playing, I mean, like the COVID unfortunately came into play with a lot of these teams. The Pac-12 only played 6 or 7 games. I think it was 6. And yeah, I mean, even some the Ivy League was the first school that ended up the first conference, that ended up canceling their season. But yeah, I mean, it's tough, and I think there's a strong chance. I think they're going to try to have this draft in person, but I wouldn't be shocked at all if a lot of players, rightfully so, choose to stay home. And I mean, even last year's 2020 class, I mean, you really feel for those people, for those guys, because they work their tails off to get to this point. And the fact that like they weren't able to walk the stage and shake Roger Goodell's hand and get that jersey number, you really feel for them. And they haven't made an announcement on the draft. I'm assuming they will, once the Senior Bowl and everything passes. I'm assuming they'll make something around March or so. I would guess beginning to mid-March when it gets closer. But my guess is they're going to try to have it in person, or they'll have it in person with no spectators at all. It's in Cleveland. I honestly didn't know the answer to this, but because I tried to look up tickets to this draft because I'm not too far, I could easily just drive there. But my guess is they're probably not going to have spectators if they actually do have it in person. But yeah, I mean, it's tough, and you really feel for the 2020 class. And there's a possibility, in my opinion, where we could see the same thing with this 2021 draft class.
Yeah, and the importance of this is huge, even, leading up to this draft, because all of these scouts and NFL guys, what they're looking at is pretty much just film from what these players have been able to put on tape up to this point. And that's really going to, create a lot of probably moves during this draft that we haven't seen in past drafts, which will be interesting to see, because maybe somebody's really shining on tape, but you don't get to necessarily see what they're able to do at a combine. So like the NFL has already announced, they are not having an NFL combine this season. So they're going to be doing measurements of these players, weigh-ins of these players at, their pro days and everything like this. So yes, the teams are allowed to have pro days, but usually, these players that are heading into the draft use the pro day as kind of a warm-up or, pre combine for them to, kind of know where they need to improve on. If they didn't run a great 40, they're going to have the chance to run a much better 40 at the NFL combine and be able to, show off their talents and their skills at a level that, a lot of these guys don't necessarily do at the pro day because they're just coming off the season. They don't have the amount of time to prepare like they do for the NFL combine to get their bodies into shape at full performance. So that's going to be a huge thing, is how for these guys in the Senior Bowl, it's extremely huge because they're getting weighed and they're still going to be they're playing a football game. And I think this is probably going to be one of the more competitive Senior Bowls that we've seen in the past, just because of that reason. These guys, especially the ones that you were talking about at the beginning of the show, Sam, and that they weren't able to play the season, like their team opted out or they decided to opt out halfway through the season or at the beginning of the season or whatever be it. So for them to be able to come out here and showcase their talents against, I think there's a lot of talented, players in this Senior Bowl compared to normal. I know a lot of these names compared to, usual Senior Bowls in the past. So they're really taking it more seriously as well. And another thing is that, teams aren't allowed to get these guys into their facilities to be able to have, sit down interviews and conversations with these guys. So they're going to be doing it all over Zoom. So it's going to create a whole other problem. But with the Senior Bowl, these scouts and everything are allowed to be there, and because it's held outside of the NFL. And so for the scouts to be able to get there and have these interviews with these experienced players who have all this time that they spent in college and, did the right thing, then they're going to be able to sit down and maybe have even a leg up on some of these other players that might not be able to do so. That's how important the Senior Bowl is to me, in my opinion.
Yeah. How's it going, Michael? Thanks for joining us tonight.
Michael jumping in the comments. What's up, guys? What's up, Michael? Thanks for joining us, man.
Oh yeah, I mean, the one player that we've kind of brought up on several episodes throughout the season in terms of the NFL draft, and that's Jamie Newman. And we don't bring that up just because he opted out. We bring that up because he's a guy that could have used another year. And right. You were even one of those guys that really expressed, yes, he has the mobility, but did Wake Forest really unlock his full potential? And I really thought Georgia could have been that guy, could have been the team to really do that. And Jamie Newman, I mean, he's, to me, of like the offensive prospects or even, I guess, the quarterbacks, he's going to be one guy that everyone is going to be keeping their eye on. And I know Todd McShay was talking about some guys that could have stayed. Mel Kiper Jr. brought up an interesting one. And Trey Lance, North Dakota State, coming from a small school, didn't throw a single interception. I don't care what division you're playing in. If you don't throw a single interception through a full regular season, that to me is pretty darn. That's unbelievably impressive. Played one game. I can't recall who they played, but it was back in October. They did end up playing one game. But Mel Kiper Jr. brought up an interesting one where, what if Trey Lance what if he transfers? What if he ends up what if he would have transferred to, a Power 5 school for a year, a team like Texas in the Big 12 for a year, and really, really solidify himself as a potential top 10 draft pick? Because I really think he's going to fluctuate, if I had to guess, unless he goes off in this Senior Bowl. I don't think he's going to be a top 10 talent, a top 10 draft pick, unless a team like, the San Francisco 49ers sitting there at 12, who I think could be on the move for a new quarterback, trade up for him.
Right.
And I think if he's selected at 10 or in the top 10, I think someone's going to trade up for him. I think he is a bit of a project. And I think of these big name quarterbacks in the first round that we've seen, I think Trey Lance has the most uncertainty in him, because not just because he played at this small school, but he only has 1 year of tape. And especially
I'm not seeing him on the Senior Bowl rosters.
I thought he was.
I have Kellen Mond, Kyle Trask, Jamie Newman, Mac Jones.
Sam Ellinger's on there.
Ian Book, Sam Ellinger, Felipe Franks are the quarterbacks I'm seeing.
Actually, yeah, you're right, actually, because I've never seen that. But thanks for catching that. But I mean, still, like, even the pro days, I mean, he has so much uncertainty, not just because he only played one game, but he has such a limited amount of tape. And that's the thing with Jamie Newman. I think if Jamie Newman would have played at Georgia, one, he very well could have ended up being first-round talent this year. He ended up opting out, rightfully so, because of COVID. But that, to me, out of all the opt-outs, was very, very shocking. And if you look at the history of Georgia's quarterbacks, the guy like Matthew Stafford, Jake Fromm, Jacob Eason, you can put Stetson Bennett in there for the time he started this season. None of those guys are mobile. And Jamie Newman is the most mobile quarterback out of all of those names from those guys' times at Georgia. And a mobile quarterback going into an offense that's run heavy, and now Zamir White staying back. We don't have to talk about early Heisman candidates because I'm going to throw mine out there and say mine's going to be JT Daniels. But Jamie Newman, to me, I think would have been an absolute stud in Georgia. And I think that's a guy that has very similar to Trey Lance, also has some uncertainty because he is a guy that could have used that year. We saw plenty of flashes from him out of Wake Forest. And I don't know, maybe this is just me. I feel like he also transferred out of nowhere. And I don't remember him making ESPN or Bleacher Report coming out with, Jamie Newman's hitting the transfer portal. I just remember seeing, Jamie Newman's transferring to Georgia. So that transfer, unless it's just me, that to me seemed very sudden, out of nowhere.
I think he's probably the biggest quarterback that people want to keep their eye on here in the Senior Bowl. I mean, you look at guys like Mac Jones, Kyle Trask, and Kellen Mond on the American side of the ball. All three of those guys are pretty much established based off of their play this past year and the year before. And Jamie Newman's the only other quarterback on that roster right now that nobody really got to see against SEC level competition. Now, is he necessarily going to be going up against all SEC competition on the defensive side of the ball for the national team? No. But he is going up against guys who have been around the game for a long time and understand and probably have the mindset to play at an SEC level. They just might not have the athleticism or talent to do so, but they're coming from other schools where they've been there for 4 years. And so they understand the game. And so Jamie Newman's really going to have to be able to show himself off here and be like, hey, you guys go ahead and do your things and, give me the chance to kind of shine. At least that's what I'd be putting in my coach's ear. But obviously, guys, we've got the American team. National team is represented by the Miami Dolphins coaching staff, and then the American team is represented by the Carolina Panthers coaching staff. So real great coaching staffs on both sides of the ball here. And we'll go ahead and get rolling into our other prospects and everything that we're watching. Who else has kind of been a surprise or kind of shock to, not a bunch of people, but, to the general public that keep in contact or keep watch of, the college football sphere and the NFL draft so far through these first 2 days of the Senior Bowl practices?
Before I answer that question, I'm glad you brought up who's representing these teams. You got the national represented by the Miami Dolphins and the American represented by the Carolina Panthers, two of which I don't see Tua on the move. But, I mean, especially the Carolina Panthers, a team that very well could be in need of a quarterback. I think Adam Schefter came out the other day. I think he was saying he could see 18 new quarterback changes this offseason. I'm assuming Teddy Bridgewater is one of those guys on that list. Teddy Bridgewater was a very promising quarterback this year. I personally wouldn't be shocked at all if they don't take a quarterback in the first round. But I think the fact that the Panthers especially are even the coaching staff is in the Senior Bowl helps them immensely if they want to target a quarterback in the first round. But in terms of other guys that I'm watching, I remember bringing up one of our first I think it was one of our first live shows. You asked me the question of, is there a guy this season? We were predicting the ACC. Is there a guy this season that you're keeping your eye on for the draft? I had two answers for you. One of them was Chris Rump, third, out of Duke. And the second one is the one I want to talk about, and that's Charles Snowden from Virginia. Charles Snowden is definitely on the leaner side. I want to say he's about 304, but he is insane on length. He has the body frame to really put those guys and put those opponents to the ground, and very explosive. And he's 6'7". And I feel like that's one of those linebackers that people should talk about more. I'm not saying he had a breakout season, but I think he could be a very, very productive asset to a team's defense in the NFL. Something else I was going to say. I don't remember what it was, but um, but yeah, I mean, Charles Snowden's definitely one of my guys that I'm watching. Oh, I would say I like the secondary class, but I would definitely say this year's draft is more offense. Is the talent wise, I would definitely say it's more geared towards the offensive side of the ball than defense. Edge isn't that deep. D line's not bad. I like the secondary class a lot. I think the secondary class is very, very talented and promising. But in terms of depth, I would definitely say offense. I love the wide receiver class. I think the wide receiver class is almost deeper than it was last year. So many fun guys to watch. So many guys that you can potentially grab in the later rounds. But I have a wide receiver that I want to talk about. But I'll let you, kind of go through some of your guys then, Caleb, before I get to mine.
Yeah, I think the biggest guy that I want to keep my eye on here is Levi
Awuzurike.
Yeah, there we go. I'm butchering his name already. I was trying not to. I was nailing it earlier, guys. I promise. But he hasn't played in like 400 and something days of football. He opted out for the season. And if you remember correctly, I think at the beginning of the season, like we were making our predictions on who do we think can make a huge leap into the NFL draft and into the first round and be a higher draft pick. And he was my pick just because of, the type of player he is. Just big, extremely good with his hands, just swim move, really getting his hands into the pads of the offensive lineman, being able to push them around and show things. So I'm excited to see what he does in this game. He's looking good in practice so far, even for being gone in so long. And then, going back to what you were saying that you're paying attention to a lot is this wide receiver class. And the wide receivers that are in the Senior Bowl. I think this Senior Bowl, the defensive line is extremely deep in this Senior Bowl. I mean, you've got guys like Marvin Wilson, you've got Carlos Basham, you've got both of the guys from Pitt. What are their names?
Patrick Jones II
and Rashad Weaver. You've got Awuzurike, you've got Dylan Hayes and Ogundeji from Notre Dame, both big guys. And you've got Taron Jackson out of Coastal, who had a great year for Coastal Carolina this season. I mean, on the other side, you've got Malik Herring out of Georgia. You got Peyton Turner from Houston. Tua Pelotu out of USC. Cameron Sample out of Tulane. All these guys I have heard their name be somewhere before throughout their entire careers on the defensive line. I mean, Marvin Wilson's not going to be a first-round draft pick, but, I mean, the fact that he's at a Senior Bowl right now is impressive. I mean, the names that they have brought in for the Senior Bowl are pretty crazy. And I think that just speaks to, like we were saying before, how important this Senior Bowl is going to be for some of these guys. Marvin Wilson got injured halfway through the season and didn't get to put a lot on film and didn't look that great for what he had to put on film this season. So he's kind of come out, looked good on one-on-ones so far. I think Rashad Weaver, Patrick Jones, I'm going to keep an eye on too, just because Pitt's defensive line was absolutely disgusting these past two seasons. So those two guys should be pretty high draft picks. But that's my position group that I'm kind of keeping my eye on, and I see them having a huge game. But we'll go ahead and jump into that wide receiver that you were talking about that, is probably making some strides already into practice, but probably had a good season as well. But somebody you're looking forward to for the draft that's playing in the Senior Bowl as a wide receiver.
Yeah, and I think this could be a guy, potentially, slide his way up into a late day 2 pick, somewhere in the 3rd round. It's a guy in versatility, insane amount of speed. And that's a senior out of Houston and Marquette Stevenson. He's 6'0" or 6 foot, 6 foot flat, 190 pounds. I would definitely say he could put on a little bit of weight. But I mean, I don't think 190 is that excessive of a lightweight, but I think Marquette Stevenson could turn into a very, very, I wouldn't say elite, but very, very talented receiver that a team like the Green Bay Packers, could put in their slot. Because the Packers love speed, and MVS is the fastest guy on their roster. MVS is up after next season. EQ is up after next season. So if I'm looking at fits, I would love Marquette Stevenson. And that's one of those receivers, though, that can turn into, those late round gems, or I would even say mid round gems. I know you and Trill were kind of talking about Jalen Darden out of North Texas.
Love that kid. Absolutely electric.
Right. Yeah. And I love Marquette Stevenson. Packers love speed. And the Packers need a slot receiver. The Packers need a true slot receiver, and I think Marquette Stevenson could be the answer to that. But that's one of my receivers that I'm looking for. Is there any receiver specifically, Caleb, besides Amon-Ra St. Brown, since we both like a lot? Actually, I don't even think he's on this roster, but
yeah, he's not.
well,
but yeah,
I guess besides like in the draft, I guess overall.
Oh, in the draft overall, I mean, that's been my guy since day one. I've loved Amon-Ra St. Brown. I've spoken about him 3 different times over 3 different shows. So, but for watching in the Senior Bowl here in Mobile, Alabama, is I want to pay a little bit of attention to Cade Johnson out of South Dakota State. Very small name, but a very good wide receiver. Already making some plays out there, and I think he made like a crazy diving catch today in practice. He looks real good. Devonta Smith, we haven't seen at all. I don't expect us to necessarily see him, even though he's there, play at all. But this wide receiver class, like you were saying, Sam, is pretty deep. So I mean, I'll just run through some of them on both sides of both teams. Excuse me. And if you stop me, if you need to stop me, if you want to talk about with them, go ahead. But I'll mention some of the guys that have already been shown, whether that be on Twitter or wherever else, videos that's coming out of them performing highly during their 2 practices so far. One guy that's kind of stood out from the SEC is Shi Smith, having a pretty good couple of days practice here. Kadarius Toney has been showing out like he always does. He's been better than his, Florida teammate Trevin Grimes, who plays the same position as him. Amari Rogers burned a corner pretty good, so that was nice to see. And then on the other side of the ball for the National League, Cade Johnson, like I said, had a great catch today. Keep an eye on Tylan Wallace out of Oklahoma State, another guy that I kind of wanted to highlight, but I wanted to go with Cade Johnson instead. And then Devonta Smith and Sage Surratt. Like I said, I don't expect Devonta Smith necessarily to play in this game. He's there, just to be a facey guy, get his name out there, do the interview type deals with all the scouts that are there. And then Sage Surratt, I think he probably has a lot of proof here because a lot of people were kind of down on him before he decided to opt out of the season because he didn't put up the numbers that we were expected to with Jamie Newman. So we'll see how that goes. But out of, who are you, just go ahead. I know we've seen some highlights. So what are some of the highlights we've seen so far for the last couple of days from some of these guys that you kind of want to put on notice?
I don't remember. I don't think you said this one guy because I wanted to briefly touch up on him, and that's Frank Darby out of ASU. ASU's done a tremendous job these past 2 seasons. Brandon Ayuk coming out. I would even say offense. Brandon Ayuk coming out. Benjamin hasn't gotten his shot. He stayed in Arizona out of ASU. One of my favorite running backs in that last year's draft. And if you want to talk about late round gems, didn't really play much. However, the running back room for the Arizona Cardinals is definitely in question. Chase Edmonds is still under contract for another 2-3 seasons. But Kenyon Drake's under that franchise tag. So, I mean, Benjamin unfortunately only got his shot. I should say luckily got his shot, to start making a name for himself on the NFL at the NFL level, over on special teams. But if you want to talk about Frank Darby finished as one of the fastest receivers after today's senior, or I think it was from day 2. Yeah, day 2 or Tuesday. From those drills over at the Senior Bowl, reported by Jim Nagy earlier today. I don't get the number off the top of my head. But I like him a lot. I think he's got elite hands, very crisp route runner, and I love his balance throughout those routes. I like his quickness and I like his balance. It's probably one of the main things. The main 2, I would say his balance is a very, very elite trait of his. But I would definitely say he's elite hands. But Frank Darby's the guy even throughout the season, I would say the first half of the season, this past season, was really going off. Like he was one of those guys in the receivers, even over on the ACC, offensive faces, if you want to talk first half outside of guys like Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne, Pac-12, you got guys like Frank Darby. Pac-12 has a lot of young talent as well. And I'm really, really excited to watch the future of the Pac-12, even though they did only play, 6 games.
Yeah.
But Frank Darby is one of my guys that I'm keeping an eye on. He's a redshirt senior, so he's been around for a while. I'm always anxious to see. I think Corey brought up a great point in the chat the other night. Anxious to see how these seniors, guys that have been there for 4 years, even grad transfers. That's not Darby, but four plus years, at the collegiate level, really transferring their game over. I mean, Joe Burrow's coming into the NFL 24, and like a lot of NFL teams are expecting you're 24. A lot of people, you got to be like a day one starter, right? And like he sat behind JT Barrett for 2-3 seasons. Came in, his dad went to Nebraska. Nebraska didn't want him because he supposedly wasn't good enough. Then we all know the rest of the story there. But he comes in at 24, and he had a very, very promising 8 games. But the Bengals, I think, could have something. I think the Bengals do have something special. But, I mean, I'm always anxious to see, like, those upperclassmen, the guys that have been there for 4+ years. Frank Darby's a redshirt senior. I think he's got a lot of promise.
Yeah, and, we're not going to go position by position here just for time constraint wise. So I'll just go ahead and toss it over to you because I know you have, a couple more guys than I do that you want to talk about. So if you want to go ahead and just jump right into that, so we're not keeping everybody too late.
You brought up Cade Johnson, small school South Dakota State wide receiver, and I want to stay over in the South Dakota, or I'm sorry, not South Dakota, but I want to stay over in the small school side. I'm sure everyone saw that pancake. This guy's been really, really impressive. That's D3. That's an interior offensive line out of Wisconsin Whitewater, Quinn Meinerz. People probably have seen the picture, videos of him. He's got the jersey half on like Zeke. I was listening to like the commentators. He does his off-season training in Canada, and he went to Hartford, Wisconsin, which is actually I ended up playing against him. Went to West Bend. He was in our conference, and then he went to Whitewater. And I love these D3 stories. Ben Barch, St. John's, drafted by the Jags. You're familiar. You're a Buccaneers fan. You got Ali Marpet out of Hobart. Ali Marpet is a starter, and
he came in and started. If I'm not mistaken,
right, he did, and he came in and he was already projected to start. And you got guys like Quinn Meinerz, who I very well think could potentially in the future, if he really, really is coached right, he could be a very productive starter. I think he could come in, depending on how the rest of his Senior Bowl goes. I think he very well could come in and be a very, very productive rotational guy. But I am very, very excited for Quinn Meinerz. I love these T3 stories. And I mean, the fact that he is even at the Senior Bowl is very, very impressive. Coming from a small like D3 school like Whitewater. And Whitewater is this Whitewater is a powerhouse school. If you're not familiar with like Wisconsin, D3 football teams, Wisconsin Whitewater is a powerhouse. They've always had, they have a history of success. I want to say they just won the title pretty recently. Because it's usually them, Oshkosh, or I want to say Whitewater was pretty deep in the playoffs, if not in the championship a few years ago. But it's either them. They're always facing, I want to say it's like Mount Mary, but Whitewater's a powerhouse D3 school over in Wisconsin for football. And the fact that Quinn Meinerz is even here and all these D3 guys, these guys have really cool stories. And I mean, those are guys that like you can't help but cheer for. Like you just love to cheer for. And Quinn Meinerz is definitely one of those guys that I think everyone should be keeping an eye on. And I think he's going to be drafted.
Yeah, I loved the picture of him today. I saw like a tweet or somebody was like Pete Bale like physique or something like that. It was the most hilarious thing I've ever seen. It was like dude just hanging out, chilling, and having a good game and giving an interview. So it was funny to see, and great to see honestly for a D3 guy getting a lot of love here at the Senior Bowl. I'll switch over to another one of mine real quick, and that's a running back out of UCLA and Demetric Felton, who is supposedly moving his way over to wide receiver when it comes to the NFL and what he's doing right now in the Senior Bowl. I don't know if you've seen his highlights, Sam, but this kid is putting on a clinic on some of these senior DBs, and that's got to have some, scouts just smiling over there. Like, we're getting this running back who is now transferring over to wide receiver, and he's making DBs who have been covering wide receivers for years look silly out there, which is amazing to see. I mean, he had one stutter and go move, and the DB was just left in the dust, and it was for a touchdown. So this guy, keep an eye out for him when it comes to where he's picked, because even though he is making that move to a wide receiver, I guess, classification, you could honestly draft him and use him in all different facets when it comes to the NFL if the NFL team takes him. So I'm trying to think of guys in the NFL who are used that way, that you use them as both a running back. And so like a Cordell Patterson kind of comes to mind as a running back, wide receiver guy. I'm sure you know more, Sam.
I wish this guy was still in there. I'm thinking Denard Robinson, running back out of Michigan.
Right.
Ended up being a receiver in the NFL over by the Jags. Wish that guy was still there. I wonder what he's up to. But that's another guy, Cordell Patterson. I mean, this dude screams versatility, and I'm glad you brought this guy up because this has been one of the big, not necessarily like big names like the Alabama guys, like the Ohio State players, but this has been a guy like that very early. Like we're not even in the game yet. I mean, we're very early in drills, and this guy's already making a name for himself. Screams versatility. Played running back, switching over to wide receiver. I think he's got the speed to play, a kick return specialist. I like that one as well.
Yeah, he could be, when they come out of high school or whatever, they get rated by 247 Sports or Rivals or whoever, and they're classified as like an athlete. That's kind of what the equivalent to this is, in my opinion, when it comes to the NFL, except the NFL is not going to do that. They strictly have to be one or the other. I guess when it comes to like fullbacks in the NFL, you can fullback, tight end, or H-back. Like you have 3 classifications. So, you could see that once he does get into the NFL, but when he comes into the draft and everything, he's just going to be classified as a running back. But it'll be cool. He's that athlete that a lot of teams are now looking for because they don't necessarily just want a guy who specifies in, running routes or a guy who specifies at catching a ball or anything. You want somebody who's more balanced, well-rounded individual. And that's what he has been doing up to this point so far. And I know there's 7-on-7 drills right now, but, I can only see him progress. And hopefully we see a lot of him come Saturday.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, let me correct myself. I knew I had this wrong. Denard played quarterback at Michigan and switched to running back over by the Jags. I feel like he was definitely on more than one team, but he was definitely drafted by the Jags. But he was one of my favorite players over at the college during his time. I loved watching him in Michigan. Back to your point. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. And I'll go ahead and get into my next player. And that's going to be, let me see if I can find him real quick. Hamza Nasruddin, safety out of Florida State. I got to show my Florida State guys some love. So I'm picking Hamza to show some love to. I've been hearing a lot of chatter that he's playing inside the box. So he's maybe moving into a little bit of a linebacker hybrid safety role, which is, I think, a preferred destination for him just based off of his length and size. And he'll be able to do a number of things. And he's been very vocal as well, leading the group on the back end there in the linebacker group as well is what's coming out of reports from the Senior Bowl. So awesome to see Hamza. He dealt with an injury. He was out for a year and a half after he blew out his knee, only played half a season last year, had 1 interception. So that was good to see for him as well. And his stats before he was, knocked out for a year and a half, which I think was his junior year, before he redshirted because of the injury, was that he just had so many tackles. It was like 110 tackles, something crazy like that. And that's mostly because, Florida State's defense gave up everything. So he had to kind of chase dudes down or be the last line of defense, like we talked about earlier on in one of our earlier shows. But Hamza Nasruddin is going to be, I think he's going to be the steal of the draft, maybe, in terms of just his pure talent and athletic ability. Dude is huge for a safety. He's like 6'3", 6'4", and you don't necessarily see safeties that big with that length on them and that size. So moving him to a hybrid role would be more beneficial for him, I think, than just keeping him as a plain, safety back there on the end or in the backside of the play. But man, Hamza Nasruddin, being vocal, that's a key. Coaches love that. Scouts love that. Front ownership loves that, to be able to be vocal on the defensive side of the ball. It's very important that you are. And then that length and athleticism, like I'm saying, should just wow scouts. And hopefully he gets a decent amount of playing time because I didn't see him a whole lot this season with Florida State. So they're going back and watching some old film on him. And I'm sure they're ready to see what he can actually do coming off of this knee injury that he had and took him out for a year and a half.
Yeah, I mean, he's 6'4", 220, and I mean, he's been consistent even before the injury. Like he just said, 101 tackles, I think it was. He's been consistent throughout his entire time at Florida State, and I think he's got the talent to go in the first 2 rounds. I think he's going to be at least a second-round pick, and I think you're right, and I think teams are going to fall in love with his utility, with his explosiveness, and the vocalness, the leadership aspect of that. And you'd be surprised how much, those interviews and like even virtual interviews, there's so much like that players or that coaches, that the coaching staff, really like, it really sucks for the players on their side. And like they have to plan. You see those like the players plan differently for that, I feel like, because, and I feel like we've talked about this before, like virtual interviews versus in-person interviews with the coaches, because the personality or who you're talking to over the computer virtually could be completely different from who you're talking to in person. So you'd be surprised how much the character really matters when coaches are, and the coaching staff really, puts these players into perspective and scheme fit and how they fit their team. And I think Hamza Nasruddin is going to be one of those guys that's going to play in the factor, that leadership role and aspect, the fact that he's been there for 4 years over at FSU. And I think leadership, I think I wouldn't say that's a substantial factor for those coaching interviews, but I would definitely say that plays a big part in terms of, how teams value certain players over others. But I like Nasruddin a lot. I love guys that can play hybrid roles. We saw Isaiah Simmons, and what was so odd to me about that is it seems like halfway through the season, like the Cardinals didn't know how to use him. The Cardinals didn't use him correctly until like halfway through the season, and then you finally started to see like the flashes. And like the first few games, I should say, we saw a little bit of struggles from Isaiah Simmons, but then like towards, I think it was the first time they played Seattle and they beat them. I want to say it was Sunday or Monday Night Football. Maybe it was Thursday. I know it was a night game, but that's the game that you really saw Isaiah Simmons come around. And the fact, if wherever Hamza Nasruddin gets drafted, whoever drafts him, if they can unlock his potential and if they can really use him correctly, I think he's got a very, very successful future at the pro level.
Yeah, he was a fan favorite here at Florida State, so I can only see him doing well when it comes to, impressing ownership, impressing management as well for any NFL organization. So, with that being said, Sam, we'll jump into one more guy that you're really interested in before we give, a little bit of highlights that the guys over who are covering the Senior Bowl are looking at.
Yeah, one last guy I want to talk about, and that's Hammacher Rashid Jr. Bit on the leaner side, I would say one of the minor. I don't really think he has any red flags. He comes in, I think he is a bit of a high tackler. He's got very, very elite vision. And I mean, I think back, even though the edge rusher class isn't necessarily that deep, I think the talent goes away very quickly. You got guys like Kwity Paye, Gregory Rousseau, Hammacher Rashid Jr., Patrick Jones II, although I think Patrick Jones II is much more efficient on the inside. I think he can play on the outside, but I love Pat Jones II, his athleticism, especially his versatility. But Hammacher Rashid is 6'3", 235, unbelievable amount of athleticism, and I think his vision, especially in the run game, and I think that's an area where he succeeds. And coming from Oregon State, playing in the Pac-12, yes, it is a Power 5 conference, but you also have Oregon State's not like a successful school compared to the other, I should say, Pac-12 schools. Because when the first teams that people think of when they think of the Pac-12 is Oregon and USC, I would definitely say. I believe there's another defensive prospect from Oregon State, Thomas Graham, the corner, the defensive back. But Hammacher Rashid Jr., I think, is one of those edge rushers, defensive prospects that could very well quickly rise up the boards into as early as the second round.
Yeah, and I think we had mentioned him on one of our previous shows as well about him just being able to fill gaps is
Mhm.
incredible, which
Mhm.
is a lot of a linebacker's job when it comes to the run game and just forcing, an offensive lineman to take the wrong block instead of taking the correct block like they're coached to do. So him being able to do that, and if I remember correctly, he is like their vocal guy, like on the defensive side of the ball. So another leader that reporting out here, which a lot of these guys are being seniors, they're expected to be the leaders, but there's also those leaders that go above and beyond those other leaders. And that's one of these guys. I truly believe this kid will have a decent career in the NFL at the linebacker position. Pretty solid all around built guy and just does the things that you need him to do. And that's another thing that, NFL scouts and coaches and management love. You ask him to do something, he's going to do his job and he's going to do it the right way the first time you ask him. And that's the type of player, excuse me, Rashid Jr. is. And I expect that to continue throughout, his NFL career as well.
And I think he's definitely a player that would benefit very well. Coming in and rotating, being a rotational player behind a veteran, behind a guy like Chandler Jones from the Arizona Cardinals. Unfortunately, went out with a bicep injury, but the Cardinals don't have a lot of depth at all. And I bring this up because I wrote a draft profile on him a few months back during the college football season. And I mean, the edge rusher for the Arizona Cardinals is one of those that's definitely in question. Like the cornerbacks position, which I think is their most glaring need, they don't have a lot of depth at the edge rusher position. They traded for Marcus Golden. Marcus Golden from the Giants reunion, I believe he was on the Cardinals before, earlier in his career. But Marcus Golden was decent when they traded for him. But if I'm not mistaken, I think he's up.
Right.
And the Cardinals are also going into this offseason. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I know they don't have a lot of cap space. So they might be relying the big part of their offseason might be heavily relying on the draft. And I think if they see some guys that they pick off free agency, I think it's going to be guys that are depth pieces. But Hammacher Rashid Jr. I think could benefit a lot from being a rotational guy sitting behind a veteran player, and what better player to learn off of than Chandler Jones?
Yeah, I mean that's a great mentor. But we log off here is I'm going to go over 5 guys that the NFL, the people who do the NFL stuff for the Senior Bowl practices don't have their names right off the bat. 5 guys that they kind of pointed out, and we can just go over them really quickly that have impressed them after the first day of practice. The first one on the list here is Carlos Boogie Basham. So he's got the cool nickname in Boogie, the defensive man out of Wake Forest. We've got Levi Owuzurike, defensive tackle out of Washington, who I was talking about a little bit earlier. We have a wide receiver. Yeah, there you go. We got a wide receiver out of the University of Tennessee in Josh Palmer. And we have a running back out of Missouri in Larry Roundtree III. And then rounding it out, another player I had mentioned earlier, and that's Shi Smith, wide receiver out of South Carolina. So, go ahead and jump into any of those if you like.
I would say the only one I was going to jump into was Shi Smith. You mentioned him earlier. He showed a lot of flashes late in the season out of South Carolina. So I'm really interested to see where he gets drafted, and I feel like that could be. See, I love this wide receiver class. I feel like we could go for days talking about this wide receiver class. Nico Collins is another guy out of Michigan. Tariq Black went. I don't think he's on the Senior Bowl rosters, but Tariq Black, Michigan transfer, went to Texas. There's so many that I'm missing, but yeah, I mean, Shi Smith, I think, is one of those guys that could be drafted, near the areas where guys like Quintez Cephas and James Prochet were drafted. But I mean, that's one of those small names receivers that very well could rise his name up the board, like Marquette Stevenson.
Yeah, he's a slot guy too. So you were talking about, Packers need a slot guy, but there's a lot of teams out there that need a slot guy. The Jets have an abundance of wide receivers right now, but I see a couple of them probably leaving. And then, what are you going to do from there? But apparently a lot of people have him as being one of the highest rated slot wide receivers coming out. He could be a day one starter. which is pretty nasty. He looks very fluid and clean on his routes, and he's been getting a lot of separation. So, I mean, that's good for him. But another guy that I wasn't too, familiar with, and that's Larry Roundtree, the third running back out of Missouri. Apparently plays very, very well. His pad level is pretty great. He has live full speed, which is impressive when you're putting on pads as a running back. He was doing good on 9 and 7, is what they're saying. Has excellent vision, decisiveness, seems poised to continue the momentum he built, having a 14 touchdown campaign this last year with Missouri, which I didn't know he was even that high up, which ranked 7th most in FBS football. So, I mean, that's surprising to me. If you're a team looking for a running back or a second running back, more likely the second running back on a team, then that would be a guy that I would, kind of point to like, hey, start checking this guy out. He's, been through the ringer for 4 years, and he kind of turned it on last season. So he's hitting his stride at the right time to be drafted. And then we already know what comes with Wuzurike. Like I talked about earlier, just absolute strength and a genius when it comes to using his hands. Carlos Basham, defensive end from Wake Forest, was super high on the boards, before this past season. I don't remember if he opted out or not.
He ended up staying. But
Okay.
that's a good example, because there's a few of those guys that really, some of them were shocking. I mean, I would argue Dylan Moses' draft stock dropped a bit. I mean, Dylan Moses is one of those guys seen as first-round talent, now falling out in the second round. Carlos Basham Jr. is another guy. I think he's character. I think he's going to become a quick fan favorite to wherever he gets drafted.
Yeah, and he was lethal off the edge when he was there at Wake Forest and in the ACC, and he just showed it even more so far in what I've been able to watch video on him. Just absolutely overpowering offensive lineman coming off the edge of the ball, just the speed, the way he finishes, and he just was working offensive linemen all day like it was, taking candy from a kid, dude. It was just too easy for him to be able to get back to the quarterback, and that's going to be dangerous when you get to the NFL. It's really needed there for you to get pressure on the quarterback. The more and more the NFL is moving towards a pass first type of offensive schemes and the different things they do out of that, whether that is having the quarterback run the ball and keep it or not. So it's going to be important for a team to get a guy like Basham. But Josh Palmer, wide receiver out of Tennessee, have you ever heard of him?
Very vaguely. I'm not too familiar with him in terms of film.
Yeah, so there's not a lot of buzz about him. He's just kind of been a 4-year solid starter for the University of Tennessee, it seems like. But they're projecting him to go, rounds 3 through 4, which, I mean, for a guy that not a lot of people knew about, didn't have a lot of buzz around his name, that's going to be pretty good. Coming out of camp there at the Senior Bowl, they're saying looked very smooth and fluid in one-on-one drills, was able to get over the top of coverage and track the ball extremely well, which in the NFL, those are all the things that they look for. And the words I keep using is more balance. We're moving towards a more balanced type of wide receiver here, not a guy that can do one thing or specialize in one thing. You want a guy that has the whole package. Seems like this Palmer kid, Josh Palmer, has a great set of skills that are going to be able to promote him to be, a number 2 or a number 3 guy in the NFL. And we'll see how he projects come up and see if he's going to get a lot of playing time here on Saturday at the Senior Bowl or not.
It's interesting because Juwan Jennings came out, and a lot of people were very surprised to see him drop that far.
Went to my high school. Juwan Jennings was my high school quarterback, ladies and gentlemen.
Really?
Yeah, he played quarterback. Awesome. Sorry, I didn't interrupt you.
No, you're fine. I mean, a lot of people were very surprised to see him drop that far. I think he went like the 5th round or so.
Yes.
Because I think a lot of people expected him to be, a day 2 pick. And if you look at the Niners wide receiver room, they're somewhat deep. I mean, they have Debo, Brandon Ayuk, Juwan Jennings. I feel like they had one more. I just can't remember who it was. But Juwan Jennings. Oh, Jalen Hurd. My favorite guy, Jalen Hurd, who I thought was definitely going to have a potential breakout season until he tore his ACL in practice. But yeah, I mean, Josh Palmer, I'm anxious to see where he falls. And I want to go back to the running backs because we were having this conversation about the running back draft class. And I mean, this could be the last one, the last topic here because I know we're running short on time. But we were talking about day 1 starters. And I was saying outside of guys like Travis Etienne and Najee Harris, I don't really see guys that can start. Stevenson got great praise from Louis Riddick. Amber says Marquette Stevenson. Yeah, I like him a lot. I mean, you're not coming from a big school like a big SEC, the Big Ten, but Houston has produced pretty decent talent within these past few years, and I love Marquette Stevenson. Hopefully, a future Packer. But running backs in terms of starters, outside of Travis Etienne and Najee Harris, I don't see too many. I think the next guy in line, I think the third best running back, and I remember texting you about this, Javonte Williams out of North Carolina. Even Chuba Hubbard. What was that? I'm sorry.
I think that Javonte Williams kid's going to be a beast.
I think he's going to be so good. Yeah. And I wouldn't say he's got the potential to be a day one starter, but I think he could work his way into the starting rotation very quickly. Michael Carter is also another guy that's on one of the Senior Bowl rosters, actually. But even Chuba Hubbard, I mean, I've always been a guy that I feel like I'm not as high on Chuba Hubbard as a lot of other people are. I think he's very talented. I personally don't think he took that big of a leap before he opted out halfway through the season. I think he's talented. I think he could be a very reliable complementary running back to a very elite starter. I mean, I've got him at 5, but I can understand putting him at 6. I know my cousin is a guy that put Kenneth Gainwell of Memphis. I like him a lot. I don't see Kenneth Gainwell as a starter, but I see a lot of Tariq Cohen in him, and I think Tariq Cohen is one of the most underrated pass catchers in the NFL. I mean, the thing I think one of the big things that's going to maybe stop teams from potentially using Kenneth Gainwell as a starting caliber running back is his size. He's undersized, but he's got an elite amount of speed, and he is a guy that has proven that he can be very productive in both the run and the passing game. And I think teams are going to fall in love with that. And just because you're not a starting running back doesn't mean you're not going to have a successful future. And I think this guy has a very bright and long-term NFL future, Kenneth Gainwell. But I've got Hubbard at 5/. I'm still deciding because I'm really, really close to putting Hubbard at 6 and Kenneth Gainwell at 5. Amber, I saw you put in the chat. Tennessee running back got another Oklahoma transfer. Tennessee's been losing a lot of transfers. If Wanya Morris is a big 5-star guy that went to Tennessee. If I'm not mistaken, I think he did go to Oklahoma. I think he did end up transferring to Oklahoma. So that's a huge get over for your Oklahoma Sooners, Amber. But we can talk recruits on another episode. But, yeah, I just wanted to bring up the running back draft class. I mean, I wouldn't say it's overly deep, but I think there's a lot of talent. I think there's potentially a lot of hidden talent in this running back class.
Yep, I agree. I think there's going to be a lot of players out there that are going to be moving up the draft board, and I think there's going to be a lot of players that are moving down draft boards. This is going to be probably one of the craziest NFL drafts that I've seen live, so that'll be cool. But we're running low on time here, guys, so I'm going to go ahead and throw it over to Sam, give a little shout-out before we go ahead and log off. We got about a minute and a half, so, make it quick.
Yeah, so Caleb and I here every Wednesday nights, 7 Central, 8 Eastern. I write for the Cards Wire. I've been doing a lot of draft profiles. I run Dairy Sports. Go give Dairy Sports a follow on all social media platforms. And Matt Skura and I are we do the Titletown show. But unfortunately, our Green Bay Packers lost, so we're going to be using these. We're going to be using this week to kind of go over the NFC title game. The unfortunate loss of my Green Bay Packers and how Aaron Rodgers will not be leaving at the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, was an awesome time, Sam. As always, I'm excited to do this with you week in, week out. Obviously, Saturday Standouts every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern time. After this show, immediately afterwards at 9 o'clock, which it's turning now, I'm hopping on Keeping It Blunt with Perry Aston, so I'll be seeing you guys there. So give us a follow at Unwrapped Sports, at Standouts, USN, at Keeping It _Blunt. Thank you, Sam, again, and I'll be talking to you soon.